switch a little bit because now the kids have gotten older and we're on education policy. So this one, there's a little bit of news that's broken lately, and I'm going to talk about that. But first, let's talk about the House bill. So the House bill did a lot of stuff to education, which was a little bit concerning. It reduced the authority of the DOE, the Department of Education, to make decisions about education policy. Basically, everything had to run through the Office of Management and Budget, and they had to stamp approval of everything. It also required higher credit requirements on Pell Grants and decreased the grant amounts. It also eliminated subsidized student loans, which means that the government would no longer pay the interest on loans when students were in school. And it eliminated most of the more generous options for loan repayment. All right, so let's talk about the good news on the Senate side. The Senate bill, thankfully, keeps the subsidized loans, it keeps the Pell Grants, and it keeps the DOE authority. However, it still makes it harder to repay student loans. So in this education section, on the House side, there were about $350 billion worth of cuts. However, on the Senate side, because it still takes away all of those different options on repaying student loans, on loan forgiveness, on the amounts that they have to pay when there's a hardship, it still ends up cutting $300 billion. And so it just makes it harder for students who might struggle to repay for their education to do so. All right, now we're going to take another switch to climate